Shalom, shalom. Kahalal Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great males, who rule well. And salutations to the brethren on the four corners of the earth, pushing the word, truth, and sincerity. Now, tonight is as we are ending the Passover and stepping into the Feast of Unleavened Bread, my thoughts were just there were a lot of people who didn't make it into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Because during the Passover, you had people that were being destroyed of the destroyer. The last plague was the firstborn sons being put to death. And whoever didn't rid the leaven out of their houses, and whoever didn't strike the blood on their blood posts were put to death on that night. You had a lot of people that didn't make it, either because they didn't follow orders and remove the leaven out of their houses, or they didn't cover their doorposts with the blood, and you also had guys who couldn't take or, couldn't stomach the fact that people were being put to death, animals too, just outside of their doorsteps. And, you had people that were simple and might have forgot who they were and went to help, and were put to death also, for not following orders. And when you look at your life in this truth, whole life in this truth is the Passover. We are, Lord willing, covering ourselves with the blood of Yahweh Shai so the destruction can pass over us and we can be delivered, And there were a lot of guys that murmured against Moses after this day, just like there are guys that are murmuring against, the shepherds of Israel to this day right now, and that aren't going to make it to the other side, This Exodus chapter 12, verse 12 says, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are." Now, I wanted to go into the word token because I believe it's not the same word as Ezekiel 9, but it's the same concept as Ezekiel 9. Let's see. Go into this word token. Awath. Which means a sign, a signal, a distinguishing mark, an omen or a warning. Token, ensign, standard, miracle, proof, so it was a distinguishing mark, and it was a distinguishing mark from what? Distinguish who should be put to death and who shouldn't be put to death, and this is something that's very serious, man. And just like when we get to Ezekiel 9, when you read the mark that was put upon the foreheads, that Hebrew word for mark was dawah, meaning, mark of exemption. And it was an distinguishing mark, man. So this was to tell the destroyer who was to be put to death or not, man. It says, "And the blood shall be to you for a token, distinguishing mark, upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt." So that mark was put there as an exemption, man. All right, to let the destroyer know, like, okay, we're gonna skip this house, we're gonna come to the next house. Oh, this house doesn't have the mark. This house doesn't have the token, So I'm going to destroy everyone in this house, I'm gonna destroy the firstborn in this house, And there are a lot of guys that were willful and that didn't do it, man. That didn't put the blood on the doorpost, man. And they weren't exempt, Just like now, man, you got guys who are not putting the blood on the doorpost, man, of their minds, because we are putting the blood post on the door of our minds, which is the doctrine, which is the name of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, which is the spirit of the Lord. And you got guys who aren't covering themselves with that spirit, that aren't being passed over at the moment and are going to be put to death, man. Verse 14, it says, "And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You should keep it a feast by an ordinance forever." And like I mentioned earlier, now Salakia. Now, you know, the whole, like I said, your whole journey in the truth is a Passover, man. Even though we celebrate the Passover, we keep the feast of the Passover. Your whole life, is filled with you trying to cover yourself with the blood, man, so that you're going to get passed over from judgment and be delivered, man. And it's not an easy time, because just as the time of Exodus 12, it was a very hard time, man. It was a straight gate, if you will, and we're in that same straight gate today. This is Matthew 7:13. It says, "Enter ye in at the straight gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way." Let me go into this word straight.
Strong's G 4728. Stenos. Stenos.
Let me turn this up a little bit.
Strong's G 4728. Stenos. Stenos.
Stenos, which means narrow or straight. It says, probably from the base G2476, narrow from obstacles, standing close about, straight. So when you look at the word straight, it's an obstacle, man, which is a position of difficulty, And going back to Exodus 12, when they had to strike the blood on the doorposts, and they had to bear witness to all of the death and destruction that was going on around about them, and still keep their faith in the Lord, that was a straight, man. That was a position of difficulty, And we're in that position of difficulty now, man, because we're essentially doing the same thing. We're seeing people getting put to death before our eyes, man. Guys that follow the truth, we're seeing them getting put to death spiritually, man, and sometimes physically. We have to worry about, or we have to see, 2/3 of our people being put to death before our eyes. So it's a straight gate, man, a position of difficulty. For wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. So wide is the gate that leads to destruction, man, and many there be which go thereat, man. So there's a lot of people that are gonna go in the wide gate to destruction, man, because they don't want to deal with the position of difficulty. Just like in Exodus 12, man, I guarantee you have people that were lazy, or they just didn't want to do it because they wanted to stay in Egypt, man, and didn't strike the blood on their doorpost, or didn't take the unleavened bread out of their houses. I mean, the leavened bread out of their houses, or get all the leaven out of their houses, There are people that probably did strike the blood of their doorposts. I mean, the blood on their doorposts, and just walked out of their houses, man, and got put to death. People that couldn't take bearing the idea of them being saved from destruction. You know how you have that, what do you call, survivor's guilt, So you have people like that, man. And you have people like that now today. Well, how come they can't get the truth? It's the same exact concept. Verse 14 says, "Because straight is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it." So an obstacle is the gate, and narrow is the way, man, which leadeth unto life. Meaning, it's going to be a hard time. You're going to have a hard time getting to salvation, man. And Exodus 12 was a hard time, man. And guarantee you, there were men after this. There were men and women after this that were still murmuring against Moses, man, and they got put to death in the wilderness, man. So just like now, after the Passover, you have people that fall out, man. You have people that fall out of the truth because they were murmuring in their minds, man, in their spirits. So just because you got passed over at the Passover doesn't mean that you're exempt from judgment. You have to, you have to constantly examine yourself, and you have to constantly check yourself, man, and constantly do what's right in the sight of the Lord, man, or else the Lord is going to judge you. You're not safe just because you made it through the night of the Passover. That's never the MO, man. You're not safe just because you made it through the Passover, man, because the elders of Israel weren't safe because they made it through the Passover, man. We walked around for 40 years so these people can get killed off, man, and die off because they weren't seen as meat, to reap the promised land, man. And you want to be seen as worthy to reap to go into the promised land, man. This is 1 Corinthians 10:1. It says, "Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea." So we all passed through the Red Sea. It says, "And were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat." Slack and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Yahushua. But with many of them, the Most High was not well pleased. He was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness, because they were murmuring against Moses, man. All the miracles that they seen, you know, all the miracles that they seen, everything that they witnessed, they still didn't believe, man. They still wanted to go back to Egypt. Just like 2/3 of our people now today are still gonna want to stay in Egypt, man. Even if they do see the chariots, even if they were in the truth and they witnessed the miracles of the Most High by their own eyes, man. They're still gonna be overthrown because what? They don't believe, man. Verse 6 says, "Now these things were our examples, to that intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Neither ye be idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play." And that goes back to Exodus 32nd chapter, man. When Moses came down from the Mount Sinai, and they made themselves a golden calf because Moses left. And they thought it was fine to do whatever the hell they wanted, man. And they got put to death. Verse 8. It says, "Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 320,000." So 23,000 people got killed in one day, man. "Neither let us tempt Yahushua, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer." And we're destroyed of the destroyer, man. Because why? They didn't believe in the Lord, and they were talking shit, man. They were talking shit, just like Israel always does in Israel-like fashion, man. Verse 11 says, "Now all these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition," meaning our warning, "upon whom the ends of the world are come." Right, the ends of the world are come unto us, man. So examples like this are written for our learning, man. Like scripture saying in Romans 15:4, man, all things are foretime written for our learning. So we don't end up the same way they did, man, during the Passover and in the wilderness, man. We want to be the ones that were delivered. We want to be in not Joseph, but we want to be with Joshua and Caleb, man. We want to be that younger generation that were delivered, man, instead of that older generation that was killed off, and didn't make it to the promised land. We want to make it to the kingdom of heaven, man. That's what this is all about, Our whole lives are the Passover, man, not just one night, We have to live in fear our whole lives of the Lord, man, not just the day leading up to the Passover and the night, going into the Feast of Unleavened Bread, man. That's not true fear of the Lord, man. That's a hypocrite, It's Ezekiel chapter 9, verse. Matter of fact, I'm going to start at 4. Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 4, it says, "And the Lord said unto him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry, for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof." Let's see what this mark is. And in Hebrew, that's thawa, which means desire, mark as a sign of exemption from judgment. Strong's definition: a mark by implication. Slack it. desire, mark. So it's a sign of exemption from judgment. Just like when you go back into Exodus 12, that token was a a token was a signifier, man. That word token was a sign of exemption as well, man. When you go back into Exodus 12 and 12, oops, Slakia. Verse 13, Slakia. That a wath, which means a distinguishing mark, a sign or a signal. So when you go into Ezekiel 9, that word thawah, meaning a mark, meaning exemption from judgment, man. So going to Ezekiel 9 and 4 says, and the Lord said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. And the others he said in mine hearing, go ye after him through the city, and smite. Let not your eye spare, neither have ye pity. And that's the same thing that the destroyer did in Exodus 12, man. Those who didn't have that token, or that distinguishing mark, that sign on their doorpost, were put to death, man. And here in Ezekiel 9, the same ones that didn't have the thawah, or that mark of exemption from judgment, got put to death, man, with no mercy. And we're seeking to have that thawah, that's that exemption from judgment, or that awath, that signifying or distinguishing mark, man. It says, and that mark is the truth, the spirit of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, man, the name Yahweh, and Yahweh Shai, man. Verse 5 says, and to the others he said in mine hearing, go ye after him through the city, and smite. Let not your eyes spare, neither have ye pity. Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children, and women. And you notice that women twice. Maids and women. But come not near any man whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. So it began at Israel, man. Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. And you notice that they began at the ancient men, meaning the elders of Israel, man. And those were the same elders, in the reincarnation. Just now today, we have elders, in our nation now today that teach us to do what? Wickedness, man. Don't teach us to do righteousness. Don't teach us to follow after the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, but teach us to follow after Satan, man. And these were the same goddamn elders that were put to death in the wilderness, man. That they were the same men that fell 20 and 3,000 in one day, man. That got destroyed of serpents, man. That got destroyed of the destroyer. That were meant for our examples, because they didn't want to come to the knowledge and statutes of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, man. So it began at the Lord's sanctuary, starting with the ancient men, the elders, man. And then it trickled all the way down to the men, the children, the little maids, the women, and there was no mercy, Same thing that's going to happen now today, man. Because 2/3 of these same people, that you've seen in Ezekiel 9 being put to death, and 1 Corinthians being put to death, and Exodus 12 being put to death, are these same people that are now going to be put to death. That are the 2/3, man. This is Zechariah 13 and 8. And it shall come to pass that in the land, in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die. Why? Because they're going to be murmuring against the Lord, man. They're going to be talking shit, They're going to be wanting to stay and worship their other gods. They're not going to want to come to order. They're still going to eat abominable foods and do what they want to do and be willful, man. And not follow the commandments of the Lord. And they're going to be put to death because of it, man. It says, but the third shall be left therein, and I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, which is the 1/3 elect, man. It says, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my power. In order to in order to be brought through the fire, man. You know, going to, Sirach, the second chapter, we have to realize that we're going to be put through all these tests, man. It's coming through as gold tried in the fire, and we have to keep our integrity. This is Sirach 2:1. It says, "My son, if thou come to serve the Lord, prepare thy soul for temptation. Set thy heart aright and constantly endure, and make not haste in time of trouble." Because people that make haste, they panic, man, and they get put to death because they're not thinking, they're being emotional, and 2/3 of our people are emotional. It says, "Cleave unto him and depart not away, that thou mayest be increased at thy last end." Which being increased at our last end would be the kingdom of heaven, man. "Whatsoever is brought upon thee, take cheerfully, and be patient when thou art changed to a low estate. For gold is tried in the fire, and acceptable men in the furnace of adversity." So then those acceptable men would be the 1/3 elect, man, in the furnace of adversity. So we're gonna go through all types of hell and and death and destruction, just like the 2/3, man. But the difference is that the 1/3 is going to keep their integrity in the Lord, man. And do exactly what He says do when He said do it, man. And we're gonna have that mark of exemption, So we come into the promised land, you know. So that's all I had. I just wanted to read to the 5th verse. Sirach's second chapter is an awesome chapter to read, you know. But I just want to stop there because we can go all down Sirach's second chapter. But but yeah, man, we want that mark of exemption, man. We want that. We want that the wa. We want that awaf, that signifying or that dignifying mark, man. You know. That's what we want, so we can reap salvation, man. So we can be passed over, so we can reap the benefits of the kingdom of heaven. So with that, I want to give all praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rachakwadash, double honor to the apostles and elders of the great millstone who rule well, and salutations to the brethren on the four corners of the earth, pushing the word and truth and sincerity. Shalom.